November 1941. The Wehrmacht was standing just outside Moscow. Through their binoculars, German officers could see the towers of the Kremlin. Their confidence was absolute. Adolf Hitler was so certain of victory that he made a promise to his troops. Before the winter snow falls, we will march through Red Square. The preparations were real. Special dress uniforms were issued and packed into soldiers' knapsacks. Believe it or not, invitations were actually printed for a grand victory banquet at the famous Metropol Hotel in Moscow. They even appointed a commandant who would govern the captured city. But history has a brutal sense of irony. The parade in 1941 did happen, but it was the Soviet troops marching straight from Red Square to the front lines to die defending the city. The Germans never got their parade. At least, not then. They had to wait 2.5 years. And when they finally entered Moscow on July 17, 1944, they were not wearing dress uniforms. They were not conquerors, and no banquet was waiting for them. To understand why this event took place, we need to go back 1 month, to June 1944, while the world was watching the Allies land in Normandy D-Day. A much larger battle was erupting on the Eastern Front. The Soviet Union launched Operation Bagration. It was a blitzkrieg in reverse. In just a few weeks, the Red Army crushed army group sent to the backbone of the German military. The scale of the German defeat was catastrophic. Worse than Stalingrad, over 400,000 German soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. When Moscow reported these numbers to the world, the reaction in London and Washington was ... skepticism. The British and Americans simply didn't believe it. They thought Stalin was inflating the numbers for propaganda. They couldn't believe an entire German army group could evaporate so quickly. Stalin was furious. He needed to prove to his allies and to the world that the German beast was mortally wounded. He didn't need paper reports, he needed a show. The order was given by the NKVD, bring them to Moscow, all of them. The logistics of Operation Big Waltz were a nightmare. Moving 57,000 men from Belarus to Moscow, dozens of trains. For the German prisoners, this journey was terrifying. They didn't know about the parade. Rumors spread among the boxcars like wildfire. Many officers were convinced they were being taken to Siberia to die. Others thought Stalin was preparing a public execution in revenge for the destruction of Soviet cities. The conditions were brutal. It was a hot summer, water was scarce. The prisoners were dirty, unshaven, and exhausted. But this was exactly what Stalin wanted. When they arrived in Moscow, they were herded into the Dynamo Stadium and the Hippodrome. Then came the order that created a myth: do not wash them. Stalin wanted the contrast. He wanted the Soviet people to see that Lubomir, the master race, were just dirty, broken men smelling of sweat and fear. On the morning of July 17th, the prisoners were given a hearty meal. To hearty, they were fed porridge with meat and bread with lard. For men who had been starving 4 weeks in the swamps of Belarus, this sudden intake of fat was a disaster for their digestive systems. Many historians argue about whether this was intentional sabotage by the Soviets using food as a biological weapon to humiliate the enemy, or simply a logistical mistake. Regardless of the intent, the result was messy. As they marched, thousands of prisoners suffered from severe diarrhea. It added a layer of physical humiliation to the psychological defeat. They truly looked pathetic. At 11 a.m., the march began. Leading the column were 19 German generals and field officers. They were allowed to keep their uniforms and their medals. They walked with their heads held high, trying to maintain military discipline. But behind them shuffled 57,000 soldiers. The column was 20 men wide and took 90 minutes to pass a single point. The reaction of the Moscow citizens is the most interesting part of this story. The Soviet propaganda machine expected anger. While the prisoners were dealing with their physical misery, the organization of this massive event was entering its final phase. Just imagine the scene. 57,000 men gathered in one place. The Moscow Hippodrome and the Dynamo Stadium were turned into giant holding pens. Eyewitnesses described it as a sea of field grey. From a distance, it looked like a singular, moving mass. But up close, you could see the individual faces' confusion, exhaustion, and absolute terror. You have to understand their mindset. Most of these soldiers were convinced this was their last day on Earth. Rumors were flying through the ranks that they were being gathered for a mass execution in the city center, or that they would be marched straight onto landmines to clear them for the Red Army. The security only added to this fear. The column was flanked not just by infantry with fixed bayonets, but by NKVD cavalrymen with drawn sabers. The sight of horses and shining blades terrified the Germans. It felt medieval. The plan was precise. The prisoners were divided into two main groups to prevent overcrowding. The larger group, consisting of 42,000 men, was scheduled to march down Gorky Street to the Garden Ring. The smaller group of 15,000 would take a different route. It wasn't just a march, it was a calculated tour. Stalin wanted to parade them past the very buildings they had threatened to destroy just 3 years earlier. There is a fascinating detail about those 19 generals marching in the front row. You might notice in the footage that they are wearing their medals. Their iron crosses, their knight's crosses, everything was still pinned to their chests. Usually, when soldiers are captured, they are disarmed and stripped of all insignia and decorations. But for Operation Big Waltz, Stalin gave a specific, personal order: let them keep their medals. Why? It wasn't out of respect. It was to emphasize the scale of the victory. Stalin wanted the world to see that the Red Army hadn't just captured raw recruits or old men. Witnesses say he marched with a grim expression, looking straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact with the Soviet crowds. He tried to maintain the posture of a conqueror, but his muddy boots and the thousands of broken men behind him told a different story. It wasn't just Soviet citizens watching. Stalin made sure that high-ranking officials from foreign embassies were present. American and British military attaches were given front-row seats. Remember, the Allies were skeptical about the Soviet success in Belarus. This parade was the ultimate proof. They expected the people to spit, to throw stones, to scream. But eyewitness reports tell a different story. There was an eerie silence. The only sound was the shuffling of boots and the clanking of tin cups. The Russian writer Leonid Lenov wrote, "There was no hatred in the crowd. There was only squeamishness, like watching a herd of rats." However, others saw pity. There is also a story about the French pilots from the Normandy Niemen squadron who were fighting alongside the Soviets. Watching the Germans, one French pilot reportedly said, "If this were Paris, the crowd would be tearing them apart." He was amazed by the discipline of the Russians. The Soviet authorities had issued strict orders to the population: no violence, no food throwing, just watch, and they did. The restraint of the crowd was perhaps more terrifying to the Germans than screaming would have been. It showed a cold, hard hatred that went beyond simple anger. Russian women, who had lost their own husbands and sons in the war, looked at these ragged German boys and wept. They didn't see monsters anymore, they saw human wreckage. The parade split into two groups. One marched along the garden ring, the other towards the circle line. As the tail of the column passed, the finale took place. A finale that was pure psychological warfare. Immediately behind the last German prisoner, a fleet of street cleaning trucks appeared. Plivolki, as the Russians call them, with powerful jets of water, they scrubbed the asphalt. The symbolism was powerful and understood by everyone instantly. They were not just cleaning the physical dirt left by the sick and unwashed prisoners. They were symbolically washing the Nazi filth off the sacred soil of the capital. It was a message to the world. The enemy has been here, but they left no trace. We are clean again. Where did this army of ghosts go? They were loaded back onto trains, but not to go home. Most of the generals were sent to specialized prisons. Some, who were found guilty of war crimes, were hanged. Others returned to Germany only in the mid-1950s. The soldiers became a workforce. If you visit Moscow or Kiev today, you might be looking at buildings constructed by these very men. The Parade of the Vanquished. If you enjoy this deep dive into history, make sure to like and subscribe to Iron History. What do you think? Was this march a brilliant tactic or a war crime? Let me know in the comments.